The paper crackles beneath my trembling fingers as I write these words. 78 years I've walked this earth, and for 53 of them, I've carried a lie so heavy it's bent my spine more than age ever could. The doctor from Willow Creek says I won't see another full moon. Consumption, he called it. My lungs fill with fluid, drowning me slow as winter approaches. Fitting, I suppose. A man who's lived by suffocation ought to die the same way. They'll find this confession after I'm gone. Maybe they'll burn it. Maybe they'll read it aloud in the town square where they once cheered my name. Don't matter much to me now. Truth needs telling, even if just to settle accounts with whatever waits beyond. Most folks around these parts still call me Judge, though I ain't held that position in near 15 years. Some of the younger ones don't even know why the nickname stuck. They don't remember when I sat on the bench of the territorial court, my gavel deciding the fates of men better than myself. They weren't there in 1872 when this town called me hero for bringing justice to my father's neck. My hand shakes worse when I write his name, Elijah Blackwood, a quiet man with calloused hands and eyes that carried the weight of the Civil War within them. He had a past, sure enough. Rode with Quantrill's raiders for a spell during the border wars, did things he never spoke of, but which haunted his sleep. I'd wake some nights to the sound of his screams, then the creak of floorboards as he paced till dawn, a bottle of whiskey his only company. He taught me to shoot when I was 8 years old. A man protects what's his, he'd say, positioning my small hands around the weathered walnut grip of his Remington. His voice never rose above a whisper, but it carried the weight of commandments. And a man pays for what he takes. The irony of those words has not escaped me these many years. By the time I was grown, he was just a rancher with a small spread outside town, keeping to himself and asking nothing of nobody. The war had hollowed him out, left him with nightmares and a limp from a Yankee bullet at Shiloh. Folks in town gave him wide berth, whispered about the blood on his hands from the Kansas troubles. My father let them talk, never defended himself. A man can't outrun his shadow, he told me once. Best to just keep moving toward the sun. I was 24 that summer, full of vinegar and schemes. Had my eye on Eleanor Mitchell, daughter of the bank owner. Golden hair that caught the light like a new minted coin, and a laugh that could make a man forget his own name. She had no eyes for me, a half-wild cowboy with more dreams than dollars. When she passed me on the boardwalk, her skirts would sweep wide as if to avoid contamination. Her father made it clear I wasn't welcome to call, suggesting once that the stink of cattle and ambition was a poor combination. But I figured that could change with the right opportunity. After all, wasn't this country built by men who seized what fortune wouldn't freely give them? The West was still wild enough that a man could reinvent himself with enough nerve and a flexible relationship with the truth. Or so I told myself on lonely nights, nursing cheap whiskey and expensive dreams. Planning the robbery took 3 months. I'd watch the bank from the saloon across the street, nursing a whiskey I couldn't afford, making mental notes of when the clerks changed shifts, when old man Mitchell made his rounds, which customers came on which days. I volunteered to help repair the bank's roof that spring just to understand its layout. I studied the safe when no one was looking, memorized the model, ordered a book from back east about lock mechanisms, told folks I was considering locksmithing as a trade. Bought myself a black gelding from a ranch 2 counties over where nobody would recognize it, kept it hidden in an abandoned line shack in the hills. Purchased a revolver in Denver on a cattle drive. A Colt Navy conversion, nickel-plated with pearl grips. Too fancy for a cowhand like me, but perfect for someone planning to reinvent himself. I chose a Tuesday in late August. Bank would have the payroll for the mining company north of town, but not the full staff they kept on Fridays. Weather had been dry for weeks, making for good riding if a quick escape was needed. I'd told everyone I was heading to my uncle's place in Colorado Territory for 2 weeks. No one would think to look for me. The mask I wore was simple. Black cloth with eye holes cut out. Nothing special. Didn't need to be. I wasn't planning on leaving witnesses. I remember the weight of that pearl-handled Colt as I pushed through those bank doors at 2:30. The sudden quiet as conversations stopped. The look on Mitchell's face. Confusion first, then recognition of what was happening. 3 customers inside, a rancher's wife clutching a deposit slip, an old-timer waiting for his monthly pension, and a drummer selling ladies' garments who'd come to cash a bank draft. "Everybody down on the floor." My voice sounded strange, pitched lower than normal, the words rehearsed 1,000 times in my head. Mitchell reached below the counter. I shot him first, the Colt bucking in my hand. The sound was deafening in that marble-floored room. He collapsed like a puppet with cut strings, red blooming across his white shirt. The drummer started screaming. I shot him next, catching him in the throat. His hands flew up, clutching at the wound as he made a horrible gurgling sound and fell sideways against the writing desk. The old-timer just stared at me, his roomy eyes wide with disbelief. I can still see those eyes, pale blue, watery with age and filled with a terrible understanding. He'd seen death before, perhaps at Gettysburg or Antietam. He knew what was coming and didn't beg or plead, just watched as I leveled the Colt at his chest. My finger hesitated on the trigger, seeing something of my father in that weathered face. "Son," he said quietly, "you don't want to carry this." I shot him anyway. His body crumpled to the polished floor, one hand still clutching his pension voucher. The paper fluttered down beside him, edged with crimson. I ordered the teller, a young man named Williams I'd played cards with just the week before, to empty the safe. He fumbled with the keys, hands shaking so bad he dropped them twice. I knew his wife had just birthed their first child, a daughter they'd named after his mother. He'd shown me the tintype, proud as any new father, just 3 days prior over a game of 5-card draw. "Hurry up, damn you!" I shouted, waving the gun at the rancher's wife who'd started praying out loud. The words of the Lord's Prayer tumbled from her lips between sobs. "Our Father, who art in heaven." The words seemed to echo in that blood-soaked room, a mockery of salvation. That's when Marshal Turner burst through the door, revolver already drawn. I fired without thinking, catching him high in the chest. He staggered but got off a shot that whistled past my ear. My second bullet hit him square between the eyes. He was dead before he hit the floorboards, his badge catching the afternoon light as he fell, a star winking out. The rancher's wife screamed then, a sound like a wounded animal. I turned the gun on her. Her eyes were the color of fertile earth, wide with terror beneath the brim of a practical bonnet. The kind of woman who'd spent her life working alongside her husband, raising children, keeping a homestead through winter blizzards and summer droughts. "Please," she begged, "I have children." She reached into her pocket with trembling fingers, pulled out a locket, snapped it open to reveal 2 small faces. Boys, maybe 5 and 7. "My sons," she whispered. "They need their mama." I remember thinking, clear as day, this has gone too far to stop now. I pulled the trigger again. The locket flew from her hand as she fell, sliding across the floor to rest against my boot. I didn't pick it up, couldn't bear to. That small piece of gold and the faces it contained would return to haunt my dreams for decades to come. Williams had the safe open by then, stuffing canvas bags with cash. His face was bone white, tears streaming down his cheeks. "Don't shoot me, mister. Please. I'm doing what you asked." I nodded, kept the gun trained on him while he worked. When he'd emptied the safe, I had him tie the bags to my belt. Must have been near $8,000. A fortune in those days. "Turn around," I told him when he was done. "No, please." He started to beg. I shot him in the back of the head. Didn't want to see his face when I did it. Couldn't bear to watch the light go out of eyes that knew me. 5 people dead on that polished floor. Blood pooling between the cracks in the wood. The smell of gunpowder and copper thick in the air. I'd planned for maybe 1 death. Mitchell, if he resisted. Not this. Not a massacre. I ran from that bank, mounted the black gelding I'd hidden in the alley behind the barber shop, and rode hard for the hills. The saddlebags grew heavier with each mile, the weight of the money nothing compared to the weight settling into my chest. By nightfall, I'd reached the cabin I'd prepared weeks earlier, 12 miles from town, deep in a box canyon where few ever ventured. I sat there in the dark, not daring to light a lamp, the faces of the dead floating before me each time I closed my eyes. What had I done? I wasn't a killer. I'd never harmed a soul before that day. Yet 5 people lay dead by my hand, including Eleanor's father. My plan to win her heart now twisted into something monstrous. I couldn't go through with it, couldn't take the money and start fresh somewhere else like I'd planned. Those dead eyes would follow me, and I knew from watching other criminals pass through our town that Pazis could track a man for hundreds of miles when the crime was this heinous. By dawn, I'd made a new plan, a terrible plan. My father lived alone in a small cabin on the edge of his ranch. He'd never remarried after my mother died, birthing me. We weren't close. He was a hard man who spoke little and expected much. But he was my father, and what I planned to do to him sits like poison in my gut even now, half a century later.
I rode back toward town but circled wide to approach his place from the north. It was early, not yet 7, but I knew he'd be awake. He rose with the sun every day of his life. When I reached his cabin, I left the horse hidden in the trees and approached on foot, the canvas bags of money clutched to my chest. I watched through the window as he cooked his breakfast. Same as every morning, salt pork and cornbread, coffee strong enough to float a horseshoe. His movements were efficient, economical. He'd grown gaunt with age. His once broad shoulders now stooped beneath his faded union suit. Gray hair hung lank around a face weathered by sun and hardship. I waited until he sat down to eat, then slipped around to the back of the cabin. The root cellar door was unlocked as always. I descended into the cool darkness, feeling my way past shelves of canned vegetables and dried goods. At the far end, beneath a loose floorboard, I knew he kept an old ammunition box. It's where he stored what little money he had, along with my mother's wedding ring and the discharge papers from his Confederate service. I lifted the board, removed the box, and added to it $500 from the stolen money, replaced the rest of the cash in my saddlebags. Then I took the pearl-handled Colt, stained now with the blood and matter of those I'd killed, and wrapped it in an old bandana before burying it beneath the potatoes in a barrel nearby. Back outside, I scattered a few bills on the path leading from his cabin toward town, as if dropped by someone in a hurry. Then I mounted up and rode hard for my uncle's place in Colorado, just as I'd told everyone I would. I spent 2 miserable weeks there, jumping at every sound, expecting lawmen to arrive at any moment. My uncle commented more than once on my nervous disposition. I blamed it on a woman trouble, and he left it alone after that. When I returned to town, I found it transformed by grief and rage. They'd found my father 3 days after the robbery. A posse had followed the trail of dropped money straight to his cabin. Inside, they discovered the $500 hidden with his savings. A search of the property turned up the pearl-handled Colt in the root cellar. My father protested his innocence, claimed he knew nothing about the robbery or the murders, but he had no explanation for the money or the gun. His past with Quantrill sealed his fate. Once a killer, always a killer, folks reasoned. The older townsfolk remembered the rumors of atrocities during the border wars. A committee of vigilance formed while the territorial judge was still en route. They couldn't wait for proper justice. They hanged him from the old cottonwood by the creek. The same tree where we used to fish on rare, peaceful days when I was a boy, where he'd taught me to tie flies with bits of feather and thread, his calloused fingers surprisingly gentle with the delicate work. "Patience," he'd say. "Fish ain't in no hurry, neither should you be." There was no patience in the crowd that gathered to watch him die. Near 300 people, the whole town and outlying farms, packed around that tree, bringing children on shoulders for a better view, passing bottles and picnic baskets like it was a Sunday social. The smell of coffee and sourdough biscuits mingled with the musk of unwashed bodies and anticipation. I arrived back in town the day after the hanging, played the part of the shocked, grieving son, claimed disbelief that my own father could commit such crimes. But privately, I expressed to the sheriff my sad acknowledgement that my father had always had violence in him, that the war had broken something in his soul that never healed. What I didn't say was that I'd ridden back in time to witness the execution from a distant ridge, that I'd watched through a spyglass as they brought him in a wagon, hands bound behind his back, a preacher walking alongside reciting passages my father wouldn't have taken comfort in. His head was unbowed, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for someone. For me, perhaps. They gave him no final words, no chance to protest or confess or call on his maker. The mob was too inflamed, too certain of his guilt. Sheriff Dawson tried to maintain some semblance of order, but his authority had been subsumed by the Committee of Vigilance. 12 respectable citizens who'd appointed themselves judge and executioner. The same men who would later shake my hand at the bank, congratulate me on my marriage, ask me for loans to expand their businesses. The noose was a new rope, bought special from the mercantile. Hemp, thick as a man's thumb, the fibers still stiff and yellow. They placed it around his neck with ceremony, adjusting it just so behind his left ear, where they said it would break the neck clean. A kindness, they called it. Civilization in the midst of barbarism. My father stood straight as they adjusted the rope. I remember how the sun caught his silver hair, how it seemed to form a halo around his weathered face. Did he know then? When he scanned that bloodthirsty crowd, did he somehow sense that his son had condemned him to this end? They kicked the wagon out from under him. His body dropped, jerked, then swung gently in the autumn breeze. A sound went up from the crowd, not quite a cheer, but a collective exhalation, as if the town had been holding its breath and could finally release the tension. Some lingered to watch him twist slowly in the wind. Others drifted away to saloons or homes, the entertainment concluded. A few women placed flowers at the base of the tree, not for the dead man, they were quick to clarify, but for his victims. By sundown, they cut him down and loaded him onto a buckboard like cargo. I even volunteered to help identify the evidence. When they showed me the pearl-handled Colt, I made a show of reluctant recognition. "He bought it last spring," I lied. "Said a man ought to have one fine thing in his life." The sheriff nodded, accepting this as truth. Why wouldn't he? I was Elijah Blackwood's son, who better to know the man's possessions? And beneath the pearl grips, hadn't they found 5 notches freshly carved? One for each life taken in the bank that day. Evidence, they said, of a killer's pride. Evidence I'd carved myself with the point of my knife the night before planting the gun in his root cellar. They buried my father in unconsecrated ground outside the cemetery. No marker, no ceremony. The town butcher and the blacksmith dug the hole and rolled him in. I watched from a distance, hat in hand, accepting the sympathetic nods of passers-by who thought I mourned a murderer's end. What no one knew, what no one suspected, was that as I stood there watching them pile dirt on my father's canvas-wrapped corpse, I was fighting the urge to scream out the truth, to fall to my knees and confess, to beg forgiveness I didn't deserve. The wind picked up as they finished, scattering dead leaves across the fresh-turned earth. A season ending, everything dying or retreating before the coming winter. One of the men, Simmons the butcher, spat on the grave before turning away. "That's for the Mitchell girl," he muttered. "She won't never marry now her daddy's gone." The irony nearly broke me where I stood. Instead, I rode back to town, rented a room at the hotel, and got quietly drunk for 3 days straight. The whiskey didn't wash away the guilt, only loosened its grip enough that I could breathe around it, could begin constructing the walls that would hold my secret for the next 50 years. The first unexpected consequence came 2 weeks later. Mitchell's widow, a formidable woman with steel in her spine, called me to her home. I went expecting accusation, somehow convinced she'd seen through my deception. Instead, she offered gratitude. "You identified the weapon that killed my husband," she said, pouring tea into delicate cups that trembled slightly in her hands. "Without your testimony, that monster might have been buried with dignity he didn't deserve." I nodded, unable to speak, around the knot in my throat. "Thomas," she continued, using my Christian name with unexpected familiarity, "my daughter tells me you've shown interest in her in the past." My heart nearly stopped. Eleanor is devastated by her father's murder. She needs stability now, a good man to look after her interests. I've observed your character. You're honest, hard-working. The bank needs new leadership, someone the town trusts. And just like that, I was offered everything I'd wanted. Eleanor's hand, control of the bank, respectability. The very things I'd murdered 5 people and condemned my father to obtain. I accepted, of course. What choice did I have? To refuse would raise questions, and some corrupt part of me reasoned that perhaps this was meant to be. That fate had given me what I sought, albeit through channels I never intended. Eleanor and I were married that autumn. A quiet ceremony, respectful of her mourning. She wore gray silk instead of white, her mother's pearls at her throat. I wore a new suit ordered from Denver, black as my conscience. The preacher spoke of new beginnings rising from tragedy, of God's mysterious ways. The small gathering of witnesses, mostly her mother's friends and banking associates, dabbed at tears and nodded sagely. Eleanor never loved me, not at first. How could she? I was merely a convenient arrangement, a placeholder for her grief. But she was dutiful, and over time developed a kind of affection for me. We had 3 children together. I gave them every advantage, every opportunity.
Our first night together as husband and wife, I couldn't bring myself to touch her. Claimed exhaustion from the day's emotions. In truth, I couldn't bear the thought of taking her to bed with her father's blood still figuratively on my hands. She seemed relieved at the reprieve. We slept with a valley of untouched sheets between us, 2 strangers bound by convenience and deceit. When I finally did claim my husbandly rights weeks later, it was a mechanical affair. She submitted with closed eyes and silent endurance. I finished quickly, ashamed of the pleasure I took from a union built on murder. Afterward, she turned away, shoulders shaking with silent tears she thought I couldn't see. And each night, I'd lie beside her in the dark, knowing I'd murdered her father and let my own hang for it. We settled into the banker's house, her childhood home. Mitchell's presence lingered in every corner. His pipe rack still stood on the mantel. His ledgers filled the study shelves. His reading glasses lay forever abandoned on the side table by his favorite chair. Eleanor kept these relics polished and positioned just as he'd left them, a shrine to the murdered patriarch. "You should sit in Father's chair," she suggested one evening, months into our marriage. "It's the most comfortable in the house." I never did. Couldn't bear the thought of occupying the dead man's place, though I'd already taken so much else that was his. The bank thrived under my management. I had a talent for numbers and negotiations that surprised even myself. Within 5 years, we'd expanded to a second branch in the next county. Within 10, I controlled much of the lending across 3 territories. Money flowed through my fingers, honest money, earned through legitimate enterprise, yet it brought no satisfaction. Every dollar felt like blood money, every success tainted by its foundation. Eleanor grew round with our first child in the spring of 1874, a son we named Samuel after her father. The town celebrated the birth as if it marked some final healing of the community's wounds. The banker's grandson, proof that life continued after tragedy. I held that tiny, innocent life in my hands and felt the full weight of my deception. This child would grow up believing his maternal grandfather a victim and his paternal grandfather a monster. Both lies of my creation. "He has your father's eyes," Eleanor remarked once, studying the infant's face. She meant no cruelty by it. She'd never known my father except by reputation. But the observation cut deeper than she could know. "Let's hope that's all he inherits," I replied, the expected response from a man supposedly ashamed of his lineage. More children followed. Catherine in 76, Joseph in 79. I loved them fiercely, perhaps more than they deserved to be loved by such a father. Taught them everything I believed would make them good people. Honesty, integrity, justice, the very virtues I had most thoroughly betrayed. The years passed. I learned banking, became respected, then influential. When the territorial judge retired in 1886, I was appointed to replace him, Judge Blackwood, dispenser of justice. The irony wasn't lost on me. I sentenced men to hang for crimes less heinous than my own, looked them in the eye as I pronounced their doom, wondering if they could see the hypocrisy behind my gavel. Some deserved their fate. Others, I'm no longer certain. My judgment became clouded by my own guilt, making me sometimes too harsh, sometimes too lenient. The money from the robbery remained hidden. Most of it, anyway. I'd buried the saddlebags beneath the floorboards of a hunting cabin I built in the mountains. Told myself I was saving it for some emergency. But the truth is, I couldn't spend it. Couldn't benefit from those deaths any more than I already had. Eleanor died in 96 from influenza. By then, our children were grown, with families of their own. None stayed in town. My eldest, Samuel, went east to study law at Harvard. My daughter Catherine married a businessman from San Francisco. The youngest, Joseph, joined the army and fell at San Juan Hill. I attended all the proper ceremonies, played all the expected roles. Grieving widower, proud father, distinguished jurist. Inside, I was hollowing out year by year. I began drinking more heavily after Eleanor's death. At first in private, then more openly as my position on the bench became secure through habit and lack of alternatives. The town tolerated my indulgence. "Poor judge," they'd say. "Lost his wife, never got over it." They didn't know what I was really drowning. There was a moment in 1901 when I nearly confessed. A drifter was brought before me, accused of stealing a horse. The evidence was circumstantial at best, but the rancher who'd lost the horse was influential, eager for a conviction. The drifter protested his innocence with such raw conviction that I saw my father in him, another man wrongly accused while the guilty sat in judgment. I dismissed the case, cited insufficient evidence, then returned to my chambers and vomited until bile burned my throat. That night, I rode to the hunting cabin and dug up the saddlebags. Counted out the money, still over $7,000. Nearly worthless now compared to what it would have bought 30 years earlier. I considered burning it, but couldn't bring myself to destroy even that tainted reminder of my crime. Instead, I began leaving anonymous donations, envelopes of cash for widows and orphans, funds for the new schoolhouse, a bell for the church, blood money masquerading as charity. No amount of giving eased the weight. When I resigned from the bench in 1910, the town held a banquet in my honor. Speeches were made about my fairness, my wisdom, my contribution to bringing civilization to the frontier. The irony nearly choked me. The mayor presented me with a gold pocket watch engraved with my name and years of service. I've never wound it. It sits in my desk drawer, marking time that stopped for me decades ago. I withdrew from society after that. Moved to this cabin in the foothills where I've lived these past 15 years in growing isolation. My grandchildren visit occasionally, though less frequently as I've grown more taciturn, less willing to maintain the facade of the distinguished patriarch. The faces of those I killed visit more often. The rancher's wife praying for mercy, the drummer clutching his throat, Williams with his tear-streaked face, Marshall Turner falling backward through the doorway, Old Man Mitchell's look of betrayal, and, most of all, my father. Not as he appeared at the end, gray and stooped, but as I remember him from my childhood, tall and stern in his work clothes, teaching me to mend fence or track deer, his rare smiles appearing like sunlight through storm clouds, his patience as he showed me how to saddle a horse or clean a rifle. I wonder sometimes what he thought in those final moments. Did he know it was me? Did he suspect as they dragged him to that cottonwood that his own son had condemned him? Or did he go to his death bewildered, genuinely unable to understand how the evidence had appeared in his possession? I'll never know. That uncertainty is perhaps my greatest punishment. There's a storm building outside my window now. Dark clouds rolling in from the west, bringing the season's first snow. My hand cramps from writing. My lungs burn with each breath. The lamp gutters as kerosene runs low. Soon, darkness will claim this confession as it has claimed so much else. In town, they still speak my name with respect. Judge Blackwood, the man who brought justice to his father's crimes. They tell the story to newcomers, a legend of frontier law and order. How ironic that my legacy should be built on the greatest injustice I could conceive. If there's mercy in this world or the next, let this truth finally be known. I, Thomas Elijah Blackwood, murdered 5 innocent people on August 17, 1872. I framed my father, Elijah Blackwood, for these crimes and watched in silence as vigilante justice claimed his life. I built a life of privilege on the foundation of these bodies, and I have never known a single day of peace. Let them burn this confession if they wish. Let them tear down whatever monuments to justice bear my name. Let my children change their surname in shame if they must. Truth demands its reckoning, even after 50 years of silence. The snow is falling now. I can see the flakes drifting past my window, catching the lamplight like dying stars. Soon, I'll join my victims. My father. Perhaps then I'll find the courage to look them in the eye and beg the forgiveness I've denied myself all these years. Until then, let this stand as testament. Not all monsters look the part. Some wear black robes and wield gavels. Some build respectable lives atop foundations of blood. And some, like me, die alone in remote cabins, finally speaking truths that come far too late to matter.